So dovetail joints. Wouldn't it be awesome if there was an easy way that you could figure out all the angles and distances before you actually cut a physical piece of wood out? In this video is how you can use Fusion 360, a 3D modeling program, to lay all this stuff out beforehand. So then you have a template that you can put right onto a piece of wood and cut them out. All right, so this is gonna be a Fusion 360 tutorial. We're not gonna be cutting stuff out. We're gonna be sitting on the computer over there because we're gonna be laying out dovetails. I'm gonna show you guys a couple different ways to do it, whether you are just wanting to create a 3D model and you can have the dovetails inside of it, or you actually wanna take all those measurements, you wanna print a template out, and then you can put it right on top of a piece. You can even cut this stuff out with the laser, and I'll show you how we use parameters so we can make this super custom to your situation. All right, let's jump into it. All right, so we're gonna jump into Fusion 360 and we are going to model a dovetail joint. So let's go ahead and kind of jump right into it. First and foremost, before I do anything, parameters are the #1 reason why I use Fusion. And so we're gonna set a few of these up. If you guys aren't familiar with parameters, there is a link right up above where I kind of walk through the different reasons why I use Fusion. But let's go ahead and set some up here for us. So what I like to do is the dovetail width, and I will show you what that is in a minute. That's going to be 0.75. Our dovetail height. And for now, this is going to be 0.75. Again, since they're parameters, all these things can adjust. So these will not be specific to your situation, but just wanted to do them. All right, dovetail angle. So we're going to do this as, you can change the units. We're going to change them to degrees. And I'm just going to do, let's go 8 degrees for now. Then we're also going to do our board height. This is going to be 6 inches, and honestly, this doesn't really matter. This is just to get something in there, and then board width, we'll call it 12 inches for now. Okay, so we have all those parameters set up. Now let's actually jump into Fusion 360 and doing some modeling. Okay, so we're gonna come here to Sketch, and this is where everything starts off. Before we do that, actually we're gonna go ahead and name this. We're gonna call this Dovetail Tutorial. All right, so we're gonna do SketchUp right here. You can also hit S for Sketch, and then you select your plane. I'm gonna do it right here. Now, let's go ahead and draw a box. So you can do up here, a 2-point rectangle. Also, the keyboard shortcut is R. Again, as I'm doing this stuff, you guys should be seeing these keyboard shortcuts pop up right here. As we're going, I'm gonna do R for rectangle. I'm gonna click on the origin, which is right here. And then with that clicked, I'm not dragging, I'm just pulling it up so nothing is being held down. And I can either click it right here, or I can go ahead and start typing in my dimensions. So you guys can see on the left, it is highlighted. That means that's going to be the first one that shows up. So this is going to be our height. And I believe, yeah, it's going to be a lot. Okay, oh, cool. So we've got that in there, and then you can see that we've got 2 black lines and 1 blue line. The goal for all of this is we want to constrain everything, and constraints mean that there is nothing that can be adjusted. So everything is defined either by a constraint, which we'll do in a second, or by an actual dimension, which is right here. So this one, just because we haven't put in our overall width, so we can hit D for dimension, or you can come up here to create sketch dimension. We're going to hit D for dimension, and then you click either between 2 things or 1 thing. So this right here would give us the height, but really what we want to do is between here and here. And that's going to give us the ability to define this. And again, you could just type in 11, but we don't want that. We want this to be a parameter. So this is our width. All right, so now we've got our fully dimensioned sketch. And what we could do is go ahead and sketch everything out. And actually, we're going to do a few different versions of this. So we're going to kind of do the simple version, and then we're going to come back and do the more complicated version. But a version, once you have it built, you can kind of auto-adjust everything afterwards. So let's go ahead and do our first one. And I am going to do a center line, meaning, and it's going to be a construction line. So I'm going to hit L for line. And then I just want something to be going straight through the middle of this guy. So I'm clicking, dragging over. I was looking for that triangle. to make sure I put it right in the middle. And then I'm selecting the line and I'm hitting X. That makes a construction line, which really just means it doesn't make this selectable. So like if we had made this a normal line, you can now see that these are individual pieces. And then if you make it construction, it keeps it one big piece. So that's really the biggest thing when you go to actually make a body here in a second. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is actually go ahead and make our dovetail. So our dovetail is going to be something kind of like this. So I hit L for line again, and then once you have it going, you can pretty much keep on clicking stuff. So I'm really not putting anything in. The only thing I'm looking for is I want to make sure this is 90 degrees. So you guys can see that little 90-degree icon right there. I want that to be to the center line, and then I'm going to here. So all of that stuff, I didn't type anything in because I didn't need to. And then I still have the line tool selected, so I'm just going to hit escape and drop out of that. So let's go ahead and start setting some of these things up that we know. First off, all of this is adjustable, and you can probably tell I drew this wrong because if we're doing the dovetail, this is the shape of our dovetail. I am going to hit D for dimension. First, we're going to set up this dimension. This is our width, dovetail width. And then I am going to pull this back down. We're going to fix all this here in a second. I'm going to hit D for dimension. We're going to go between here and here, here and here. And this is our height, dovetail height. Then what we want to do is do a symmetry. So you can do a bunch of different constraints. So not only can you do dimensions, but up here you can actually define constraints. And the only one that we're going to use is symmetry, meaning that I want this line and this line, they need to be the same thing. So right now I can drag it and they are actually doing pretty good. But you can see I can actually adjust this one independently of the other one. So I want them to be symmetric to each other. So we're going to like this and this. And then it wants to do a symmetry line, which is going to be this guy right here. So now you can see this icon has popped up, and that is our symmetry constraint. So if I adjust this guy, you can see the other one is going to adjust down below. And if I'd done this from the beginning, it actually would have been easier to kind of move stuff around. Now, the only thing we have left is you can see that this line and this line are blue, meaning that it does not have a way to figure out basically what this is right here. So we are actually defining this by an angle instead of a width. You can do it kind of either way, but in our case, it's an angle. So hit D for dimension. Click this line, and then the angle is going to be off of the center line. And so right now you can see it saying 11.17, but this is really whatever our dovetail angle is, which I think is 8. Yes. Cool. And then once you do the dimensions, sometimes it can get kind of confusing. Like it might have just looked like it made a line going all the way here. It really didn't. So you can actually just kind of click these dimensions and move them around. And that is just for you. That isn't affecting the model really at all. That's just kind of so you can see stuff however you want to see it. All right, so we have this guy created. Now we are going to come back and duplicate this, going this way and this way. So you can either copy and paste it. So you can click all of these guys, then hit Command C, Command V. And then this dialog box pops up, and there's a move copy, which is right over here. And so you can kind of move this around. We could drop it right here, hit OK. Then you can see it's not attached. So what you could do is do this coincident, meaning that this point needs to be connected here, and this point needs to be connected here. But there's still some things that aren't defined, as in it doesn't know what the distance is. So you could actually kind of click and drag this whole thing. The symmetry angle isn't in there. So you basically would have to kind of redraw it every single time. So we're not going to do that. Instead, I just hit Control Z to kind of get out of that. All right, so now we are going to duplicate this. Instead of doing the copy and the paste like we just did, let's actually do something called a rectangular pattern, meaning that you can basically duplicate this going in this direction as well as this direction. You can see right now this is set to 3 and 0, and then you have another dialog box that is also 3 and 0, and those are the two axes that you can duplicate this. But in our case, we're only going to do one of these, so we're just going to be playing with this one. This one we're going to keep at 0 because we don't want multiple copies going in this direction. So first, you're going to select what you want to duplicate. In this case, it's going to be this guy. So you click all 3 of those, and you're good to go. Next step, you're selecting your direction. We're gonna select, usually you can do a line on the model. So in this case, it is right here. And then you have these arrows. So we can click and drag. You can start to see what's going to happen. So you get this dialog box right here. This is the total distance, and this is the number of times it's going to duplicate. So it duplicates 3 times in 2 inches. Same exact thing is showing up right here. So quantity 3, distance 2. Now, a couple things we want to change up. First off, we don't want it to just go in this direction. Well, we could, and then we could kind of repeat it and do the other side. Or instead of going one direction, you can click symmetry. Now you got 3 with the extent of 2 inches going each direction. So 4 inches total. Now, we want to change this because I think I want this to be 5. And because of the way we made this number is always going to need to be odd. If we do 4, make it even, not going to look right because it really needs to be centered between this gap. But with the way we're creating it, we're actually putting a dovetail right on the center, which is usually the way I make my dovetails anyway. So let's keep that at 5. Now the extent. So we don't want this to be 2 inches. Although, I mean, honestly, you can make it 2 inches. But what I want is I basically want the distance from here to here to be half of this distance. And I can kind of eyeball this. I could try to do some math to figure it out, but I could also just set this up as a formula. So then even if I scale this, it will always adjust. So let's actually do it that way. So I'm going to we'll do it right here. It makes it a little bit easier for me to type it out. First off, we're going to type in overall height. And you can see what is nice is it's going to adjust as we go. Actually, it's board height, not overall height. And so you can see it is doing the overall height. So from here, actually from here to here is an overall height. So since we're doing symmetry, we need to divide that by 2. Now, that's great, but it's not taking into account the fact that we already have one of these made. So let's actually do minus our dovetail width, close that parentheses, divide by that by 2. That's great. But then really, that's great, but you don't want a dovetail coming right at the edge. Again, we want that gap. So, and that gap is going to be half of one of these, meaning that we really want 2 times this guy. And there we go. That is what we are shooting for. And again, what is great about this, I just hit OK. I am going to go over here to modify. I'm going to go to change parameters. And what's awesome is, let's say we adjust the board height to 8. You can see everything scales, and this is still half of that distance. Now, you might actually want it to be like half of this gap, which you can do. You just kind of have to rework the formula. But in my case, I usually just do it half of the distance of the dovetail. All right, let's jump this back down to 6. And we are looking pretty good. So let's go ahead and finish the sketch. Come up over here, click Finish Sketch. Now, what we've got is a sketch that we can actually do an extrude from. So what I'm going to do now is hit E for extrude. You can see up here under Tools, you can modify, you can create a bunch of different things. But in our case, E for extrude, or this one right here, press pull, is going to be what you're going to be using. Then you're going to select your profile. So again, this is that center line. If I had that as an actual line, it would be giving me 2 different points I could select, which is fine. But with making a construction line, it makes it faster because all we have to do, let's click that. Then you can see that it is asking for a distance. Again, it's the exact same thing up here. And we're going to do this as 0.75. This could also be a parameter, but for now, it's not going to be. Then you can define the direction. So it's going in positive direction. And if you do negative 0.75, it would be going in this direction. But we're going to do it in this direction. And then just as a rule of thumb, we won't get deep into it here. Anytime I make a new piece of wood that is going to be cut and then glued together, screwed together, whatever, that's going to be a new component. Hit OK. And then under here, you can see this is that component. You can turn it on and off. All right, so that is one side of our dovetail, but we actually want dovetails on the other side as well. So let's go ahead and go back into our sketch. So this is the timeline. What's great about the timeline is you can always go back in time. You can make a change and then you can pull it forward. But for sketches, you can just go directly into the sketch and edit it because we want to do the exact same thing here on this side. So we could have done the rectangular pattern. So if we change the quantity to 2 instead of 1 and the distance to 2, and you kind of play with this, you can see that we're going to make a copy, but we really need the mirror of that. So we're going to set this back to 1. We're going to set this to 0. So if you were just doing like a box joint, that would be a way you could do it, and then you could set your total distance. But in this case, we're going to cancel out of that. What we want to do is an actual mirror. So before we mirror, though, we actually need a mirror line. So just like we made one here, we're going to do one going in this direction as well. And I am kind of scrolling across the top until I get the triangle right there. I'm going to pull this down. And again, I'm looking for the triangle. And then also it can give you like that 90 degrees. And then you know you're good to go. Escaping out of that, clicking it because we're going to make it a construction line, and I'm hitting X. You don't have to type in X. You can just click it right here. Does the exact same thing. All right, now we can actually do our mirror. So up here under the sketch tools, under the create tools is mirror. Click that, then click all of your lines. Then you select your mirror line right here, and now you can see those have mirrored over, which is great. And you can see it's doing all the constraints. So tons of our symmetry constraints came over. Everything looks great. Finish that sketch. So whenever you make a new component, it's always going to turn that sketch off. So you'll probably need to come in here under the sketch folder, turn that sketch back on. And you could do a couple things. So we could right now just go in, we could hit E for extrude, and then extrude this through, meaning it's going to cut this piece. And so instead of distance, you can do all. And what that's going to do is just cut through the entire piece and then hit OK. So that's one way to do it. Also, instead of that, so I'm just going to Control Z out of that. When we actually made this guy, so right here, right click that, edit that feature, make sure these are not selected, then hit OK. Going to do the exact same thing, except we just did it on the timeline. So that is pretty much how you make the actual dovetails. Let's go ahead and make the pins for the dovetails. And it's really, really easy if you have gotten to this point. I am going to need to make a board that is going in this direction, as well as a board in this direction. So I'm just going to do this off of this base sketch right here. And the only thing that I need is basically a line going in this direction. And I am going to have it, these aren't going to be like half-blind dovetails, anything crazy. These are going to be just straight up right on the edge. So this line is going right here. And this is like if you're doing a side view of the board. Finish that sketch. So now if I go E for extrude, I'm going to select all of these geometry points. We have all of those that we can select. And then we're going to call this overall width. And you can see right now it wants to automatically cut it. We don't want it to cut. We want it to make a new component. And then for the distance, it's still wanting to cut it. So make sure you've got that overall width. So then the board width, now it's going all the way across. Hit OK. Cool. So we've got this set up. I'm going to turn this sketch back off now. So I'm just going to hit this I. That turns it off. Then if we make that disappear, you can see that we've got the board there, but it's interfering. So what you could do, you could go in, turn the sketch back on, and then do the extrude on the side. But there is a great command inside of Fusion that is called combine that literally lets you do things once they are intersecting each other. So this dialog box pops up. This is our target body, meaning this is the thing that we want something to happen to. So in this case, we want it to have all of the dovetails cut out. So the pins are all that's left. Then you select your tool body, meaning literally this geometry. And so now you can see that it is going to cut that out. We want to set it to cut, not to join or intersect. And then we want to make sure this is always selected, meaning that this isn't just a tool that we're using to remove material. We actually want this part of the piece. So make sure that's selected, hit OK. Now, turn this off. You can see there are our pins on that side looking great. Now, again, if we go over to parameters, what's great about this is we can adjust all of these things and it's going to adjust for us. So let's say we want to do 10 degrees instead of 8. All of these adjusted on both sides. So I'm not doing the board over here. You would do the exact same thing that I just did here. Really easy. Then maybe we want to make the dovetail width. We want it to be skinnier. Make it 0.5. They're making it a lot skinnier. Those are looking pretty cool. Do it like that as well. So that was a great part about the parameters, to actually be able to adjust the dovetails once you make them. But moving on to the second part, what if you actually want to change the number of dovetails? You can see that we set that up in the actual sketch. So you can come over here to the sketch, then you can come into here and you could adjust this number, but this won't affect further down the line. So I'm gonna make this 7 right now, hit okay. So now we have the sketch, which is right, but you can see that first off, it didn't mirror the other ones over. Because if you remember, we actually individually selected all of these pieces, mirrored it over. So even when you adjust it, you haven't selected these new things to bring over. So if we finish the sketch, you can see the exact same thing on the actual components. Everything's scaled except for those 2 new guys. So we're not gonna have the pins, we're not gonna have the dovetails. So how can we actually fix that? So before we get into the second part, I want to let you guys know that this video is actually brought to you by me. I have done a few courses on Fusion 360 that if you guys like this, we really take it that next step, and I'll walk you step by step through an entire process. We have the big course, Furniture Design in Fusion 360, and I actually just put out a smaller one if you want to make a workbench. So if you want to go way more in depth and get lots of examples and really learn how you can use Fusion 360 inside of your shop before you make your first cut, then these could be a good option for you guys. There is a link right down below where you can save 25%, whether you're taking the smaller course or the bigger course. There's also a free one as well on making a bed in Fusion 360. So check all of those out. All right, so let's jump back into Fusion, and we are going to set our dovetails up so they are a parameter, so we can adjust the number depending on the situation. So not only can you make a pattern out of a sketch, you can also make a pattern out of pretty much anything. So you can see under the create in the normal solid menu, there is the rectangular pattern, which looks pretty much the same thing as the sketch, except instead of just doing components or bodies, you can do features. And so what we're gonna do is make this cut an actual feature, because then we can do a rectangular pattern of that feature that will apply across, and we can set that up as a parameter. So in order to do that, I'm actually gonna go all the way back to the very beginning. I'm pulling this timeline all the way forward. Then I'm gonna right click, I'm gonna delete everything. I just wanted to keep my actual parameters still in there. And now we're actually gonna set up one more parameter, and we're gonna call this a dovetail number. And again, if you click into units, you can actually click no units, and then make sure this is always an odd number. All right, so we basically went back to this point when we had created the overall sketch. Then we had created our dovetail. Right now I've got this at 3/4 for the height and 1/2 for the width. Again, all this is going to change, but if yours looks different, you can go into the parameters and change it. So at this point is when we made our rectangular pattern within our sketch, but we don't want to do that. So instead what we're going to do is go ahead and finish our sketch. Then we're going to create our entire board. So I want this and this. This is before we cut out the dovetail. Make sure this is set up to new component, and this is going to be 0.75 for the distance. And turn our sketch back on. Now we are going to cut this out. The reason we're doing this now is this now will become a feature, and that's the feature that we're going to be able to do the pattern off of. So I hit E for extrude, I selected this. For our distance, we're going to select all, meaning it's going to cut it all the way through. So even if we adjust this thickness later, we could have made that a parameter. It's going to always go through. Hit cut, everything looks good. So now that we have this, we are able to go in and actually create our rectangular pattern. This is going to look pretty much the exact same as we did before, except the feature is going to be what we're doing instead of the sketch. So down here in the timeline, we are going to select this. That is our feature. So literally what we did, that extrude right there, that's the feature. The direction, again, this is the exact same as we did before. The extent, make sure it's set to symmetry. Now we can actually type in our dovetail number. So this is always going to adjust. And then as we move this, you can see that 5 is coming in there. So right now we've got this at 1.5. And again, this is our board height minus our dovetail width times 2 divided by 2. And then hit OK. Awesome. Now let's pull up our parameters, and we can adjust it. So let's set this to, make sure it's always an odd number. Again, hit it at 7. And now you can see that it's going to adjust the actual number of things that we've made, which is exactly what we're looking for. All right, so to get this to the other side, we are going to actually do a mirror, just like we would do with our sketch, which is right here. But we don't have a center line, and the center line in the sketch, even if we had it, wouldn't work. We actually need a center plane. So go up here to construct, hit mid-plane, then you're going to select two surfaces that you want basically this plane to be inside of, and then this guy is going to be selectable. So this is just a different plane that you added to the sketch that you can use when you are doing anything with construction. So come up here to create, hit mirror. Now make sure we've got this selected as well as this. You can see everything is selected. Hit the mirror plane and hit OK. Now that has adjusted to the other side. Let's turn the sketch off. Actually, let's go back into the sketch. Again, we're doing what we did before, where we're going to make our other wall. Looking for 90 degrees. Here it is. And then we're making sure these are collinear. Finish that sketch. Then I'm going to hit E for extrude, and I am going to go our width, our board width, and then make sure this is set to a new component. All right, so now we turn the sketch off. Just like before, that is there, but nothing is cut out. So we're going to use combine. So the exact same process. Select this, make sure cut, tool body, done. Turn it off, and now you can see that we've got that guy made. Now you have an idea of what your dovetails are going to look like. You can adjust them however you want it to be. Maybe you want the height to be shorter. You only want it to be 0.5. Maybe you want this to be thicker, maybe 0.75. And at this point, you are not doing any math. And so maybe you actually want to cut this out and you want to use this as a template. So what you could do, you can come up here, you can go create sketch, click this surface, and then what that basically does, finish that sketch, what this does is it captures that geometry. If I turn this off, you can kind of see right there, that is the entire geometry that we had in there. Then at the sketch level, you can right click it, you can save as a DXF, and then that DXF file you could bring into a vector editing software, or you could cut it out on a laser or a CNC, and then you could put that directly onto a piece of wood and then cut it out, or at least you would have a template to do all of your lines to where then you could go in and chisel out, or however you guys are going to cut it. So you can make that DXF file, you can send it to a printer, you can use a marking knife, draw it out, cut it out. This is a super fast way, especially if you want to kind of see what the look looks like. So if Fusion is something that is new to you guys and maybe you haven't checked it out before, I actually just put out a video kind of walking through the main reasons I used Fusion for an upcoming bed build, and there is a free tutorial that is along with that. That is actually right there, but we will jump into it right now. So until next time, go make or break something in your shop. See you guys.